Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and a great pleasure also to debate what surely must be the single biggest question in education policy in Britain over the last 5 to 10 years. And the motion that this House believes school choice is the best way to provide educational opportunity and improve equity. This is a motion which cuts across the political parties, because it was Tony Blair who first came out of this with his academy programme, and it was Blair who expanded it, then his successors Andrew Adonis and Michael Gove, an apostolic succession built on this policy, now created a situation where now the majority of British secondaries are now academies. And it was John Reid, a former communist, who said that this was a matter of social justice. Why should the rich be able to have choice in education, he said, and the poor not be able to? Surely the role of any progressive government is to give the poor the same choice as the rich do. But back in those days, this was largely a theoretical argument. There hadn't been that many academies, certainly not many to make an impact. And there weren't that many free schools either. But we now today can debate with the advantage of a good few years, not that many, but a good few years of this inaction. So we can now answer questions like, for example, take the city we're in now, London, some of the best schools, perhaps the single best cohort of state schools in the country right now. Is that because that a good number of free schools have opened in London, and that London parents have got more choice than perhaps parents of any other part of the UK? Or is that to do with other factors such as the London challenge? And then again, you have things which the fans of free schools like me need to admit that not all of them have been great successes. For example, the International English School, the Swedish chain, opened the first for-profit school in Norfolk, which I was delighted about, and then dismayed to find it was pretty much a big flop. So has what school choice delivered what it has dangled? Do we need more of the same, or a pause on the whole Blairite experiment? We've got a great panel who are going to speak for exactly 6 minutes each. Today we've got on my right Suella Fernandes, who's MP for Fareham, opposing the motion, Laura McInerney, did I say that right? Almost. Editor of Schools Week. Seconding for the motion is Ryan Shorthouse, Director of Bright Blue, and then seconding against the motion, Andrew Harrop, who's the Fabian Society's Director and General Secretary. So if we can start by asking you, Suella, to join me to the podium and speak there. And you know something, before she tells, we'll do a quick show of hands. Right? This is to see who agrees with the motion right now, that school choice is the best way to provide opportunity and improve equity. Show of hands. And those against? Okay, so the ayes have it right now, but let's see how that changes throughout the course of this debate. Suella.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to thank the Centre for the Study of Market Reform in Education for their invitation, and to the IEA for hosting us this afternoon. I'm pleased to propose the motion that this House believes that school choice is the best way to provide educational opportunity and improve equity. I wholeheartedly believe it. I believe it, Mr. Chairman, because the alternative, the lack of choice, led to a dull, egalitarian mediocrity at best. That's the product of the post-war preoccupation with comprehensive education. And at worst, comprehensivization has left a generation of children unable to fulfill their potential, shackled teachers to bureaucracy, killing their passion, leaving our children's abilities frustrated and talents unrealised, all by a system which was insensitive and unresponsive. But I believe this motion because it reflects reality. Life is complicated, pluralist and diverse. People differ in all kinds of exciting and glorious ways, and our education system must reflect that. That's why choice is essential. That's what John Stuart Mill and Milton Friedman argued, and what Professor Peterson just this week set out when he explored the evidence of progress that school choice has generated in the US. And I'm not just talking about this from a lofty and academic perspective. I wholeheartedly believe in this motion because it was school choice that changed my life. My parents came to this country with nothing and settled in Wembley in Brent. Brent was and is one of the worst performing London boroughs on poverty, attainment and worklessness. My parents were aspirational working class people. I started my education in a state school where the teachers went on strike and there was poor discipline. My parents exercised choice. They decided to send me to a local independent school. I would not have made it to Cambridge University were it not for that great school chosen by my parents. So my parents had high expectations and were empowered to exercise choice, but they had to pay for it. Fast forward 30 years, and I am chairman of Board of Governors of one of the first free schools which I helped to set up, Michaela Community Schools, down the road from where my parents still live in Wembley, offering that same knowledge-based curriculum, discipline and rigour that I enjoyed in my private school, but this time it's free of charge. And we can see the results. There is huge demand for places from parents of local children who can see the results that we are getting at Michaela. Parents are voting with their feet, as they should. Parents and pupils should be the ones choosing the schools, not the other way round. I agree with the Prime Minister when he said this. Yes, there will always be schools that are good and those that are less good, but our policies are about giving all parents and children, not just a privileged few, the choice of a good school. More good schools, more help for schools that are failing, more types of schools for parents to choose from. That is our policy. Those words were uttered in 2004 by the Prime Minister in question, Mr. Tony Blair, and he was speaking to the Fabian Society. I know. He was amongst friends, you think. I know it is unfashionable today in Labour circles to cite their most successful leader of all time, but I think that we should take note. This is not just some right-wing conservative obsession. It has been embraced by progressive centrists such as Tony Blair and many others around the world. The charter schools program in the US, very similar to the free schools movement here, was started by a left-of-centre trade unionist, Albert Shanker, and has attracted much support from progressive Democrats like Bill Clinton. What Shanker and others from the left saw is that school choice already existed before charter schools, just as it has existed in Britain before free schools and academies in the UK, the only thing being that it was restricted to the wealthy, who were able to buy places at independent schools, or increasingly to afford to buy houses in the catchment area of good schools. What Tony Blair was arguing in that speech was the progressive case for school choice, that it should be available to all parents, regardless of means. That's the way to improve opportunity, Mr. Chairman, and equity. Of course, he found the notion is not uncontroversial. After making that speech, setting out comparatively mild reforms in the Academy's programme, he faced implacable opposition from his own party and was forced to make concessions. By contrast, David Cameron has offered support to Mr. Blair to get the good parts of those school reforms through and kept his word. An early example of what it seems fashionable nowadays to call the new politics. At heart, Mr. Chairman, this is about parents' expectations. And it is sad that parents' expectations have been so low for so long, a consequence of lack of choice. If there is no alternative, why expect more? The important point here is that high expectations have been sacrificed at the altar of equality. We should all aim for the stars, regardless of what your parents did or where you come from or your wealth. Choice enables expectations. The point is reflected well in the schools reform episode of Yes, Prime Minister. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with that. In fact, Tony Blair mentioned it recently in a Radio 4 programme. In that episode, Prime Minister Hacker tells Cabinet Secretary Sir Humphrey that he's realised how to reform the educational system. He says, "I'm going to let parents move their children to any school they want." Sir Humphrey fails to understand, so Hacker clarifies. He says, "This government will let parents decide which schools to send their children to." The novel idea, when it finally sinks in, is met with disbelief. "Prime Minister, you can't be serious," Humphrey exclaims. "But it's preposterous. You can't expect parents to make these choices. How on earth would parents know which schools are best?" When Hacker points out that Sir Humphrey's own education at Winchester School was the result of parental choice, the civil servant protests, "Well, that's different, Prime Minister. My parents were discerning people. You can't expect ordinary people to know where to send their children." That, in a nutshell, is the problem for the opponents of school choice. It is premised on an outdated, patronising, man in Whitehall knows best attitude, so brilliantly satirised in Yes, Prime Minister, prevalent in our education system for so many years, entrenching inequity and the premise that only the wealthy are able to exercise choice, and cultivating what Nick Gibb calls the soft bigotry of low expectations. That choice, of course, would mean little if it only meant a choice of bad schools. John Prescott, Tony Blair's own Deputy Prime Minister, seemed to say, "If choice is not a right-wing obsession, it has proved popular in countries, not the few, and is indeed a great driver of equity."
So, if the motion was school choice is a lovely idea, then I would probably be on the other side of the table. But the motion actually put before us is school choice is best for educational opportunity and improving equity. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say two things about this. One is that I don't believe it's even true. I don't think it's real. I think school choice is a bit like trying to sing the sound of silence. As soon as you try to do it, it disappears. And secondly, if I can't convince you that it's not a real thing, given that you spent a day to discuss it, I will nevertheless, I believe, show that it's not the best way of improving either educational opportunities or improving equity. So it's very funny to laugh at these ideas. If there's a great school, everybody wants to go there, ha ha ha, why would that be terrible? Well, it's terrible because classrooms are of a finite size, and they're built on sites of a finite size, and unfortunately that means that only a finite number of people can go to them. So if we talk about school choice as the idea that parents can choose which school their child goes to, and there is one fantastic school in the area, perhaps it is Michaela Free School, which is doing extremely well, then there is a problem. Because if everybody wanted to go there, there are only one of two choices. Either you expand the school, or the school starts to make a choice about who's coming in. School's choice. And even if we get into this idea of lottery, in the end, that's still not a school choice. What it is a randomly allocated school. You didn't choose it, you entered the lottery, you chose to do that bit, but you didn't choose your school. So why don't we go for the expansion option? Well, I'm the editor of Schools Week, and one of the things that we do is we put out a variety of league tables each year. This year, we look at children on free school meals, so the poorest pupils. We look at the schools that have the highest proportion of those children, and then we look at just the results of those children, so we strip everybody else out. And when you look, small schools are always the best, pretty much, for those pupils. There was one school that was quite large in the top 10. As soon as we start expanding schools, particularly for the poorest pupils, there seems to be a problem. That's not always the case. There are some fantastic big schools, but when we look at this data, it's really difficult to come up with the idea that simply expanding a school is going to work. And even if we thought that it was possible to do without losing quality, it isn't always possible to do because of the size of the site. So that site, there is not enough space to simply build a bigger Michaela Free School. So school choice, education opportunity, best for expanding education opportunity, I would argue it's not even real. But let's say you've got a doubt in your mind, you've got a reason, no, I can definitely show you a reason why this is real. It's a real thing, it can really be done. Well, I would argue that even to bring about education opportunity and improve equity. Stephen Rifkin has worked out in Texas, which is one of the charter school states that's done a lot of different things over the years. And I spent 2 years out in the States studying charter schools, and in particular with views looking at free schools. And Stephen Rifkin was fascinating because he came in and he spoke to us about how the opening up of these new schools, allowing parents to pick which school they go to, gradually moved the average achievement of the pupils quite significantly over 10 years. Brilliant, school choice, it works. But what he said was actually the difference between what was happening in Houston and what happened in other states where school choice was happening but you didn't see this move, was that they were closing the schools at the far end. So it wasn't actually school's choice or school choice that was driving. What was happening was that by saying to people underachievement or really bad performance or poor school management will no longer be accepted, and the local authority, as was, or a similar improvement group, if you like, there, went in, closed the schools down and passed them to a different provider. And actually, that's what's happening within the academy system right now. That's why it's a great system. If anyone was expecting me to come and stand on this side of the table and argue this from some lefty, Finland-loving perspective about collaboration, you're completely wrong. Actually, what I think is really impressive about the academisation system is it offers an opportunity that where schools are not improving centrally, a patrician conservative approach almost of saying this is not acceptable anymore, we will come in, we will take this school from you and we will give it to somebody else. That is what's driving up standards and improvements. Because if things are not working in one place, they're handed over to somebody else. So, does school choice feature? Is it a good thing? Is it important? Yes, of course. Do I want to take it away from somebody? Absolutely not. But is it the best thing for educational opportunity? I don't believe that it is, because actually you could be driving up these standards, as has happened in Houston, as is happening here, even when free school choice isn't out there, you would still get standards moving up, whereas actually, if what you did was just said to everybody, you can go to whichever school you want, we would end up either with massive expansion and a decrease in quality, or we would end up with schools that are too big, unable to take pupils, and in the end, it's going to be that to kick in. Finally, I would just say that if there is going to be one idea around vouchers, then I think we need to think about the fact that actually extracurricular activity in their extracurricular time, on their weekends, with their readings. If we're going to put money into something, why not think about what the Sutton Trust has said, which is put that voucher into extracurricular outside of school activities and put it there so that you can drive up pupil achievement through lots of different skills and lots of different experiences, rather than focusing on the chimera that is school choice that isn't even the best for educational opportunities. And that's why I'm against this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron Shorthouse.
Okay, thank you to the CMRE for inviting me. Now, the majority, overwhelming majority of the room are in favour of the motion, so we would have done a very bad job, I think, Suella, if we lose. But after your very rousing speech, I'm sure we'll be all right. And I must say, actually, preparing for this speech, I spent my morning reading Gabriel's book from the CMRE, which is very detailed and dense, not easy reading, but very comprehensive nonetheless, and that is very much rooted in evidence. So I want to argue, on the back of really what Laura's just said, that increasing school choice is one of the best ways, alongside other interventions like high-quality preschool education, tried and tested teaching methods like phonics, as well as raising the quality of teaching, that school choice sits there in the top league as one of the best ways of improving educational outcomes, especially for the most disadvantaged pupils, and as a result, thereby raising equity. I would say, in fact, at the moment, we don't have ample choice in the system, and that is leading to inequitable outcomes and suboptimal performance. Two observations about choice in England. The evidence from the UK and overseas, as Gabriel outlines, shows that school choice has to operate in a properly designed system to lead to both efficient and equitable outcomes. So, for example, proper market entry and exit. Parents need proper information to make choices on quality. And schools are sufficiently autonomous, for example, academisation. which actually really started under John Major with the City Technology Colleges and then moved into Blair and Cameron has continued it. So everyone's grappling to own that policy, but there's probably many authors of it. And in fact, I think the move towards more choice started under the 1988 Education Act, when parents were allowed to choose schools. And because it does not exist, the choices available to different parents are deeply inequitable. So because of the catchment-based system, advantaged parents and children are able to live closer to better schools, or they, of course, can afford to pay to go private. These choices are not available to more disadvantaged families. So, for example, we know from evidence that the average family has about 12 primary schools in a kind of 3-kilometre radius, but only about a third of those are accessible to the average parent. It's probably less accessible for poorer parents because they have less means which to afford transport, etc. So the choice available to disadvantaged parents is much less and therefore leading to inequitable outcomes. But why is choice a vehicle for raising outcomes? I think there's from the literature, 3 reasons. The first is improved matching, so the child can go to a school which suits their ability. The second is reallocation from bad to good schools. And the third, and probably the most important, is the competition effects. If you have more schools in a particular area, does that drive up standards? Looking at the evidence internationally, it is mixed, but Sweden and Chile has better evidence suggesting that when you do have more schools in an area, that does lead to spillover effects, increased competition, other schools in that area raise standards. In England, there is some evidence that competition effects are good, especially for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, but only if you have complementary reforms such as school autonomy. So, for example, Simon Burgess's work has shown that, particularly from early academies, there was a sort of increase in competition and standards from those early academies, and the autonomy of those academies was important. Policy Exchange, for example, has done recent work about free schools and the effect that that has on other schools in the area. There was some questions around the methodology at Policy Exchange, but it is indicative of some improvements that perhaps new schools create. And crucially, actually, although there was evidence of minor effects, there's been no evidence of negative effects from increased choice and competition in an area. So, in conclusion, the evidence is mixed and positive when necessary other elements are complementing school choice. And as I said, across England, choice is restricted, leading to inequitable outcomes and suboptimal performance. So what would I do to increase choice? Because that's what we need to do. We need to increase the amount of choice in the system to boost excellence and equity. Proper supply side reform, free schools, yes, more of those are starting to come through, but there's still many barriers. For example, planning obstacles, the banning of for-profit into the free school system. I would change that. Increased autonomy for schools to respond. Should be allowed that, but a lot of schools haven't responded for a variety of reasons. And also improved quality of information. There's still a lot of reliance on raw test scores rather than the more reliable value-add scores. All of these things are important to increase choice and therefore improve outcomes. The final thing I would say is around catchment areas and mitigating the influence of catchment areas, which I think is restricting choice for those in those disadvantaged areas. I think we need to find a way of incentivising schools, not instructing them, but incentivising them to do more in making fairer admissions, for example, banding or lotteries. And that's the way forward to increase choice and as such increase equity and outcomes. Thank you.
And finally, Andrew Harrop from the unconverted Fabian Society.
Choice exists, so to agree with Ryan, it should be fairer. So we should scrutinise the way that schools select their pupils incredibly closely. Religious schools should not be able to discriminate in the way they do today. They should, if they're going to take public money, at least half their pupils should be on an open selection. Similarly, where schools have incredibly tight, be able to, be, in my view, required to use ballots, banding, whatever mechanism works best. The motion we have in front of us, when it comes to educational opportunity and to equity, choice is irrelevant, it's insufficient, and in some cases it's harmful. So I'm going to work through each of those three. Irrelevant, first of all. We know a huge amount about the drivers of successful schools, successful outcomes for children. Great teachers, great curriculum, great technique, great leaders, transparency and accountability, intervention when it's needed, autonomy to innovate. None of that touches on the choices that parents make. And actually, when you think about what is the real challenge facing schools in England, the real challenge is the long tail of underachievement, not the brightest kids doing a little bit better, or even the coasting in the middle. It's the chilled town with a smaller school leaker, and after that, a market system. A system where we create a framework but allow institutions to operate as snooker balls, being manipulated by market forces. We have a worldview that is completely inadequate. In fact, success in education, working together within institutions and between institutions. And crucially, it takes local leadership. That's not just about policing rules, it's not just about making sure an admissions policy, it's not even about stepping in a case of extreme failure. It's continuous support and improvement, and it's system-wide, area-wide leadership. Let me give you an example from a recent failure report looking at young people who are NEET. That report found area-wide failure from the schools, failure from the career services where they still exist, failure from the colleges, a failure to innovate, to coordinate. What it didn't find was serious disadvantage of the sort of multiple layers of disadvantage that you might expect those young people to come from in terms of their backgrounds. What it found was kids who had done badly at their GCSEs and had then not been supported by the colleges to have a second chance, being unemployable at 18. That is system-wide failure, but no individual leader could claim that it was their fault and that they had a requirement to do it. That's why local authorities or other local agencies have a vital leadership role that works above with coordinating schools. Finally, choice in some circumstances can potentially be harmful. I'm not saying it doesn't have its upsides as well, and it brings benefits. We shouldn't dismiss the real sense of involvement and empowerment that children and parents can feel through it. But it has its downsides. There is the risk of sorting, where choice leads to some schools with more advantaged intakes and others with less. I was talking last week to a governor of a school right next door to a new free school, and they've seen their rolls fall. They've seen, more importantly, all their middle-class children leave. The challenge for that school is obviously much greater now than it was 3 or 4 years ago, both in financial terms, but also in terms of their intake. But there are other ways that choice can potentially cause harm if pushed too far. It can create a competitive culture where they fail to work together when they need to. The sort of fraying of collaboration and cooperation, the sense of a community of schools working together. It can create a consumerist culture amongst the parents. Market choices risk becoming a it should be involving parents getting involved in the life of schools in terms of how they work to make sure that they get the best for their children and for all the other children in that school within its life, rather than making a one-off choice at a particular age band of which school to make. Parents, if they're going to be truly empowered, should be part of the decisions, the choices that they're taking part in their child's learning, but on a wider scale, getting involved with the entire leadership direction of the school. And that doesn't just mean a handful of parents becoming governors. It means also the final risk that choice can potentially bring is creating a transactional culture. A culture where we only focus on the measurables that a school can produce, where we only focus on the league tables, and already we touched on which numbers are the best way of reporting it. But of course, education is about much more than that. And when you ask parents, they talk about it, the rounded education they want for their children, not just the published league table style results. But of course, as soon as you're in a process where accountability is mainly delivered through the choice of institution using published data, then you get to a situation where neither the institution nor the parents are in a place where they think about all the wider benefits of education and all that is beyond exams. The Fabian Society, about 6 months ago, published a report on the alternative to a marketised school system called stakeholder schools. What we called for was lots of autonomy. This is not about going back to top-down control or statism. Autonomy, trust, dialogue within the school community and between schools, innovation, but within a context of networks of local collaboration, accountability and support. That's the real way to improve progress, not choice.
Thank you. We'll quickly throw it over to the floor then. So,
I hope people forgive me for giving a view rather than a question.
oh, no, what you've got to do is you've got to say, do you agree at the end? That's the standard format. But keep it tight and then pretend it's a question.
I did my best. So what I heard was two different political views, which were essentially the same. One political view took the view that you destroy the physical building and rebuild a school. The other takes the view that you metaphorically destroy the building and rebuild the school. An unwillingness or a fear of reforming the teaching profession and dealing with the real problem, which is the quality of teaching in some classrooms, which goes back to what Tim said at the end of the last session, I think. I think that's the real issue. It's not the physical buildings, it's not the metaphorical institutions, it's the people inside them.
Okay, we'll take another couple, then we'll get the... Sorry?
Thank you, James Johnson, New Schools Network. I just wanted to pick on one of the things that Brian spoke about the sort of barrier we've spoken about is in the free schools application process, adding in another category of social schools. I just wanted to get the panel's view really on what we can do or what we shouldn't do, in the case of both sides of the panel, in regards to lifting and alleviating those barriers to school choice.
Lifting which barriers, sorry?
So just some of the potential barriers out there that they've identified.
And do the third question, right behind you.
Yes. So I've got two questions, my chair. One for those in favour, one for those against. Both Suella and Ryan, you talked about a key part of school choice of having breadth and feedback would actually undermine that breadth and actually undermine the whole concept of school choice and why you might choose a curriculum over another one. And on the opposing side, Andrew, you said about that performance measures would undermine all of those things that parents care about beyond exam results. And I put it to you, why wouldn't they bring that into their choice? Why wouldn't they care about the stuff beyond that? And why do you feel that would undermine it?
Okay. Any questions? Any answers, panel?
I'm happy to take this last point which has been raised about the EBAC. Despite increased spending per pupil per head over successive governments, in 2010 we still face the situation, the crisis I would say, that 2 in 5 primary school children were functionally illiterate or enumerate. And that is a scandal for a country like Britain. So there is an inherent problem about the rigour with which we are teaching numeracy and literacy, maths and English. So I believe that the EBAC, which embodies increased rigour, is necessary. So in terms, I don't think it kills diversity, choice or innovation in the education system. There needs to be a baseline level of achievement that all pupils and students and people using the education system should attain. Beyond that, I think that then we should open up the market to more novel ways of teaching. But I think that's why the EBAC really goes to the root of this problem that we are facing in this country, of literally the numeracy level being below par, and is the only now option that we can use.
But you will accept that there is a slight contradiction between the government saying choice, we want to trust these teachers, etc. When it comes to the EBAC, they don't trust the teachers. They're telling the teachers what's best for their kids.
Well, I think this is what I mean. It's, you need a base minimum. And beyond that, then we have this creative innovation and free and guarantee. And I think it's the solution to a very, very serious and chronic problem.
Anyone else in the panel wants to take any other points?
I'll pick up on the teaching quality. I was a classroom teacher before I became a journalist.
Oh, that explains why you're so good in the clothing on there.
It's around aren't throwing things or texting. Well, you're texting under chairs possibly. But teaching quality is absolutely. To say that nothing, I think to say nothing's been done about it, or that it's kind of a elephant in the room is incorrect. And I don't know if that's what you were getting at, but certainly that's been the major focus really of most reforms for the last 15 years or so. I think the early 2010 government allowed itself to get a little waylay with some of the academies and preschool stuff. But by and large, that is the focus of most schools. But actually, you don't improve it unless you're going into schools, as I said before, and talking about you're not doing good enough. How are we going to bring other people in to help you? And that's not the best way of improving educational opportunity.
Can I just say, I don't think that's entirely right, because with free schools and freeing up with academies, you have much more control over how you recruit and employ staff, which gives much more autonomy to the running of a school in terms of workforce. And I think that is one of the key elements to the success, I hope, of the free school movement or academies, because they've got more freedom. But if a teacher is underperforming or not enjoying their job, then there's more power for that leader to get rid of that person.
Okay, then. Quickly.
So very quickly on this school choice thing, I'm going to be quite Fabianistic now and say that I think school choice alongside other interventions which are tried and tested and proven, like phonics for example, is good. And with school choice I think there's a difference between what is taught and how it is taught. And the government might say EBAC is very good because it leads to these outcomes in the long term. The parents still can choose because they can see that school has better teaching of that curriculum than another school. So you can still have school choice there. It's just a different way of framing it. Just very quickly on the social integration point, I think this is the government are really looking at it for segregation in the UK, and I think that's partly a product of a lack of school choice. So finding ways to ensure that we get more mixedness in schools, I think is really important.
Okay, thanks, Roger. James, how much time? We've got to wrap it up. Do we have time for another set of questions?
Yeah, go on, get another set of questions.
Okay, yeah, so.
Because I was declaring interest in that.
Everyone's
responsible for educating 3 of the black children. But not responsible for the policy that emerged from this government. But I just want to take issue really with Andrew Harrop. And I think he rather gave the game away when he's criticised faith schools and said, after all, they're taking public money, taking public funding. And this I think goes to the heart of this issue, and for me, the heart of the whole issue of vouchers and parental choice. Because in the end, I think, apart from all the other things that we're talking about, standards, good teaching, I agree with all of them, how I disagree with them. But fundamentally, the responsibility for the education of children must rest with the parent and not with the state. The state has an obligation to enable parents to educate the children, and has an obligation to ensure that they have the means to educate the child, and has a responsibility to children whose parents don't discharge that responsibility properly. But when Andrew talks about, after all, they're taking public funding, that seems to be a mindset which says, actually, the children more or less belong to the state, and it's the state's responsibility. That seems to be fundamentally wrong and flawed.
Yes, sorry, the schools are taking public funding. I think they have an obligation to serve the whole community rather than just their own religious community. And what I said was half their places. So half their places for their own religious community is fine, but as you well know, the evidence of the social segregation that religious selection creates is very compelling.
Well, I don't think it is as compelling as you say, anywhere near. I won't go to that. But let me just point out that the parents who send their children to school are part of the community that we're talking about.
Part of the public. Yeah, because you're.
Well, that's what happened in America. I don't think it's quite good enough.
Well,
that's a conversation for another time.
Okay. Right. Yes, sir. Quickly, yeah.
Yes, I went to a C.V. school, a Catholic college, and a community school, and they're all excellent. And I don't think there's a problem with faith schools. And I think a lot of the results that say that faith schools teach a diverse range of people are to do with the fact that they're faith schools and that they're probably very good schools. But I do think that there does appear to be a consensus, and there was a consensus this morning around admission systems that, as you were saying, Andrew, if you are taking public money, or if you're taking a public voucher, or any kind of or if you want to teach pupils, you shouldn't have means to cream skim them, and you shouldn't have means to select the pupils you want to teach, which is not an argument against faith schools. It's an argument. Richard Romano in 2012 did a review of voucher systems, and they found that only under the condition that there were no opportunities for schools to select pupils could school choice work to reduce sorting and selection. So that's the vital issue. Do you agree?
I think our panel have got to sum up now, so I think we'll see if they can. See, if I had Laura's powers of authority over him, I'd magic you guys to do it all under a minute. But let's see if you can just give, in a few sentences, to sum up your last chance to persuade this audience, which is on the edge.
Sure. So if I haven't yet convinced you that choice is a chimera, and I think I already did, but if I didn't convince you that things like closure or extracurricular vouchers are better, and I think I already did, let me give you one last shot on why I do not think it is the best choice or the best system for education opportunity choices. To go back to this point of parents having the right to choose for their children, absolutely they do. And I wish Sir Humphrey had asked, I've been in his position when that question was asked, because unlike Suella, my parents did not make that same choice. My parents actually, bus driver and a secretary, and my primary school decided to give me a private school entrance exam without their knowledge. When I took it, I passed, and I passed with a full bursary. My parents sat 11-year-old me down, and they said, what would you like to do? Would you like to get on a bus every day and go to a private school? Or would you like to go to the one down the road with your friends? And I picked my friends. Our school failed systematically for 10 years and was eventually closed about 4 years ago. Now, I went on, I did fine. A lot of people who were my friends did not. Now, school choice is in that system. That was absolutely their choice. That was absolutely my choice. Do you know what it didn't do? It didn't give educational opportunity to everybody in that school. It did not bring equality of outcome. Were there better things that could have been done? Could somebody have gone into my school earlier? Could they have brought collaboration? Could they have closed it down and sent me somewhere else? Absolutely. So maybe it's a nice to have, maybe it's an important to have, but is it the best thing? Absolutely not. Thank you.
Yes. This is the rising tide that lifts all boats. And the evidence from around the world confirms that when there is more choice in the education market, there are wider benefits and knock-on effects on other schools. That's whether that's Sweden, whether it's Florida, British Columbia. We had a great exploration of that data on Monday by Professor Paul Peterson. The US is a great example of where it is working, and the beginning signs of the free schools evidence here is also supporting that. The Education Select Committee said that what can be said is that, however measured, the overall state of schools has improved during the course of the academisation programme. The complete effect, the competitive effect upon the maintained sector of the Academy's model has incentivised local authorities to develop speedier and more effective intervention in underperforming schools. And that's the key. It incentivises enterprise, innovation, and raising standards. So that's why school choice is the right solution for equity and achievement.
Andrew.
Parents do their best for the kids, of course they do, but parent power should not be distilled into one choice you make when your child is 11 with limited information, probably influenced by your peers in one way or another. It may be, you know, if you're the affluent family, you're thinking about the intake of the school as much as life rather than just some rational criteria. Of course, people deserve the right to make a choice, but is that the best driver rather than parents getting involved in every aspect of a school's life as opposed to a single market choice? We know so much about what improves a school, particularly what helps failing schools and disadvantaged children who are at risk of underachieving. Choice is not on that list.
Right.
Okay, so I'm both equity and efficiency, and we should support it.
Well, let's go to another S20 things. Hands. And those against? I detect a slight swing in this direction, so I think I'll call it for the opponents. And congratulations to all of our panelists. Thank you.